Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Delahunty Tokyo Training. And my special guest today is an old friend of mine, President Delahunty, who is the president of STH JAPAN in Japan. Brendan, welcome.
Thanks very much, Greg.
So we've known each other a long time, but you've
Yes.
actually been in Japan a long time as well. So how is it that you wound up working in Japan?
Well, I originally came to Japan on the JET program, like a lot of people do, and it was more of a chance to see Japan during the bubble. So I came here in 1993. I was expected to stay maybe 2 or 3 years, but here I am, 30 years later, still hanging around. So it was a great opportunity for me to get here. So from that job on the JET program, I ended up working in a college teaching English, and that kind of led me into my role at Pearson. So Pearson is the world's largest education company, and I ended up working here as a salesperson, as a sales manager for about 4 years in Tokyo and Osaka, and then I was moved back to London to work in the global project management office there. So that was a great experience for me. We looked after all the international projects, and obviously large companies have a lot of large projects going on, so there's some oversight that's needed. So that, combined with my experience in Japan, actually led Pearson to asking me to come back to Japan in 2007 because there was a serious management issue that they had with the company here. So I came back and I was helping my boss. He was running the company for a year. He then moved on to run APAC after 12 months, and he asked me to run the business here in Japan. So I ran the Pearson Education Company here for 7 years. I left in 2014, and I really wanted to get into the sports industry, and luckily enough,
Why is that? What was appealing about the sports industry?
Being an Aussie, for a start, sports is just part of our culture. But I think the key thing at that time was that over the next few years, the Rugby World Cup and Tokyo 2020 was supposed to be hosted in Japan. Both of them are fantastic events. I was particularly interested in the Rugby World Cup aspect. So I set myself a goal of spending a year or so trying to find a job associated with the Rugby World Cup. It actually took me a year and a half to find it, but I ended up in this role where we ran the hospitality program for the Rugby World Cup, and then we were selected to run the hospitality program for Tokyo 2020 as well. Unfortunately, because of the spectator ban, that program didn't go ahead, but there was some great experiences there for me as well. And what we've done now is we've moved on to looking at setting up a travel business. So we're taking Japanese travelers or Japanese customers to international sports events like the Rugby World Cup next year, to the Australian Open, tennis, Grand Slam. We still do hospitality, so we've got a few events coming up next year around that as well. And then we work with other major international sports rights holders such as Formula One, and we are acting as a sales agent for them for their Paddock Club hospitality this year and next year.
So STH is an international company?
STH is an international company. We've got 4 offices. So we have headquarters in the UK, we have the Japan office, and then we have New Zealand and Australia. Japan is slightly different to the others because of the shareholding that we have here. So our majority shareholder is STH UK. They're backed and owned by a large French multinational called Sodexo, and within Sodexo we sit within a group called Sodexo Live. But the other key shareholder that we have in Japan is JTB. JTB own 49% of our business here. So we've got some really good shareholders. They're both large multinationals. It was key when the Olympics was on, the support that they gave us to make sure that everything could carry on when the business was instrumental in us still being here today. So very grateful for the trust that they've shown us in the business.
So in terms of your leadership career, when you were here with Pearson the first time, you're doing sales,
Yes.
and then you go back to the UK and you're doing a bigger job, and you come back to help the boss, and then he hands it over to you. So that occasion where the boss said, I'm heading off to wherever he's going to run APAC and you take over Japan, was that your first experience to really run a team in Japan?
It was my first experience running a relatively large team. So I had a sales team before of about 6 people.
This is in Pearson?
That was in Pearson,
Okay.
yes. But this was the first time that I'd had to run a business and overlook the whole areas, all the functional areas.
So how was it going from being on the JET program to getting a job with Pearson as a salesperson to becoming the head of the sales team and having to manage other salespeople, Japanese salespeople, I presume?
Yeah.
How was that? What was challenging about that first leadership role?
Well, I think always in your first leadership role, there's always concerns about your confidence, your ability to help people. I think we had a couple of Japanese people and a few non-Japanese people on the team. So culturally, there weren't that many problems. At that time, the business in Japan, the Pearson business, was actually called Longman. They hadn't actually graduated to using the Pearson brand. And Longman has a very good reputation in Japan, mainly for the dictionaries that they produce.
Right.
So most English teachers and professors knew about business. It made it easy for us to get into talk to them about our other products. But in terms of the teams themselves, I think leadership is something you kind of have to grow into a little bit, and that's why it seems to always be incremental steps as you move up the ladder. So you take a team, see if you can run them. If you do well, you obviously get promoted. And for me, I think that first team that I worked with was great. They were a lot of fun. I guess you always feel a little bit of the imposter complex when you take on that first leadership role, and you have to it takes a little bit of time to grow into it, as I said. So, but I did that, and then I was quite happy then to move to the UK and work in a different role within Pearson.
And then when you came back, was it obvious to everyone that you were going to take over? Was it obvious to you that you were going to take over, or it wasn't clear at that time? I
don't think it was necessarily clear. For me, I was slightly resistant to coming back to Japan because I had a life in the UK at that time, and it was only because of the problems that the Japanese company had that I was actually asked to come back. I was literally asked to come back within 24 hours. I got a phone call asking if I could leave the next day to come back here.
Wow.
And that there were a number of issues that were going on in the business at the time that posted a $6 million loss the previous year. The management team here were a holdover because essentially Pearson had acquired a Japanese publishing company. So the management team of the Japanese publishing company no longer wanted to sit within Pearson and wanted to leave, despite the fact that so much money had been invested in the company. So there was a sort of internal revolt happening. So it wasn't just a situation of a company not doing particularly well. There was more of a situation of a management team actively working against the owners of the business to not necessarily destroy the business, but to try and find a way out of the acquisition that had been made.
And so at some point you've come back, people probably remembered you from before, so you're a known entity for most people, and then you're now running it. So how was that situation to go from being the colleague, sales manager, now you come back, you're the boss?
Yeah.
How'd you go with that transition?
Well, that was quite interesting because when I left Japan, Pearson hadn't acquired Kirihara at that stage. And when I came back, so the Pearson education business when I left was 40 people. And when I came back, the Pearson Kirihara business was about 350 people, most of whom I didn't know.
Big scale change.
Big scale change, and I think one of the biggest problems for me at that time was that I was relatively young as a leader in Japan. Within that company, I was I think 38 to 39. The average age of the managers was around 50, 55. Quite a few of them were in their 60s. And as you know, the age factor is quite important in Japan. So not only did they not know who I was, they saw me as someone coming from Pearson. I was much younger than them. and because it was publishing for the Japanese high school market, whereas Pearson tended more to publish for the university market, but it was felt that I didn't have the necessary knowledge and background to work with the team there. So I wouldn't say I was received with the most welcoming of greetings, I guess you could say. So I had to really work hard with that team to change things.
So yeah, exactly. What things did you try, or what things did you find worked well to work with that team of the older, more experienced, unhappy resistors? You know.
Yeah.
I mean, welcome to your direct reports. They all hate you.
Yes. Yeah.
And everything you represent.
It was.
So how do you get them on board?
Well, first thing that we did was we looked for the people who weren't happy, who were desperately unhappy working within the company for Pearson, and we set up a voluntary redundancy scheme.
Right.
So it was kind of an effort to try and clear the decks, if you like, and we did a couple of those over the years that I've worked in Pearson Kirihara. So that was the first thing. That allowed us then to look at who we could then bring up from within the ranks as new senior managers, and it's always a little bit difficult when you don't know people. So it's a little bit trial and error as you try and find the right people. But you look at where they've been working up to that stage. You get a feel for their ability and their integrity. And what we found was that by giving these younger managers opportunities that they weren't expecting to receive for another 10 years, they really stepped up to the role. Now, that, like I said earlier with myself, when you're stepping up to a new role, sometimes you have concerns with your confidence and your ability to do the job. So we had to implement a lot of training. We spent a lot of time figuring out how we could make things better. A lot of listening, a lot of generally getting opinions, and not necessarily listening to every single opinion, but at least giving people a chance to have their voice and have their say, and then having a discussion about how we move forward and take the company forward from there.
Because presumably a lot of those people that you promoted 10 years earlier are now leading people who are older than them as well. So they've got a duplication of your problem of being younger in age.
Yeah.
And they would think obviously probably less in experience than their seniors.
Yeah.
But they're now the boss. So that's actually, it's like, pockets of these things are going on all over the place at the same time. So that must have been very hard for them as well.
It was, and that's why we did a couple of voluntary redundancy schemes, because some of those older colleagues that we had could see that the emphasis was on bringing through new and younger, more open-minded talent. So I think we in the end ran 3 voluntary redundancy schemes. So gradually, a lot of those older employees tended to move away. They took the redundancy payments. They ended up setting up another publishing company in the end, which was a competitor to us, but that's fine. We had belief in our ability to sell our products and create our products, and our job was to actually make our company turn around and then get it back to the shape that it should have been in.
And so you've got the issue of growing new direct reports, existing direct reports. So, and you can train the new ones more easily, I think, in a way, because for them it's a step up. What about the existing people who were not ready for redundancies, but probably needed to change their mindset a little bit about where we're going with the company, what's the future of the organisation?
Yeah.
How'd you get around that area?
So we would do quite a few town halls. So we would bring people from all over the country to Tokyo to do meetings and town halls, and particularly in the first few years that I was running the business. But then I also spent a lot of time visiting the branches as well, doing sales calls with the salespeople, so a lot of one-on-one conversations, a lot of dinners with those branches, because the further you are from Tokyo, obviously the harder it is to listen to an opinion every single day. So I would spend quite a bit of time in the regional areas, talking to the sales teams, listening, generally building a fairly good relationship with people. I think everyone was respectful. And for me, I think the turning point really came in people's minds, because the whole issue of the Pearson Kirihara company, there was a lot of anxiety about what having Pearson as a parent company meant for Kirihara, and the events of March 2011, when the earthquake and tsunami hit. We had an office up in Sendai, and all of us went through that same situation of having to deal with the consequences of that. But Pearson as a parent company was absolutely amazing. So immediately sent off enormous amounts of supplies of food and goods to the team here, arranged for us to have a new office, essentially put a lot of time and effort into making sure that people were safe and properly looked after. And I think that was a turning point, really, because what I feel is that because up until that time we'd made a lot of improvements on things like warehousing, logistics, our systems, everything was much more robust than it would have been under the old Kirihara management. So there was an understanding that there were actually benefits to having a large global parent company for Japan in a situation like this. And I spent an awful lot of time on the phone to the UK during the first, I guess, 3 months or so after that event, and that I think really crystallised the benefits of having Pearson as a parent company. So the sort of atmosphere improved considerably after 2011, because of that one event. So I can't take all the credit for making the changes that happened within Pearson Kirihara at that time. I was helped by outside events, but it did seem to make a big difference.
And in terms of day-to-day getting people engaged in the work, you've had a joint venture, which is not joint venture, you had a merger and acquisition actually, basically. Yeah. And so you've got to get people, and Japanese are very good, they can spot, that's a Kirihara, that's a Pearson. They know exactly who is who, right? Yeah. It's like the blue team and the green team. It's quite, how do you make that one team, and so getting people engaged to be one team. How did you go about that? What did you find worked well to make them one team, part of earthquakes aside, but just from your side and what you were trying to do?
Well, I think that you talked about Pearson and Kirihara being separate teams and people recognising that, but when we pulled the management team together, the majority I think were from Kirihara, as they should have been, because they were the larger part of the company at that time. The thing I think that really helped pull everyone together is that we were doing a lot of large projects in addition to the publishing work that we were doing. So we had to put a new ERP system in for a merged company, because we were using two systems previously. So that was a big project that we had, and we had 5 or 6 old-fashioned warehouses that we had to combine into one single warehouse unit, because the cost savings on doing something like that were absolutely fantastic, but it was something that people weren't used to doing. So in addition to their day-to-day jobs, every single management person was working on these projects with me, and those projects were painful. They're not easy to do. The ERP system implementation, that took a year. The warehouse project took a year. There was another project to move all the printing from Japan to China, which was another massive project with huge benefits. And it's almost through the pain of those projects that the team really came together, because essentially all of them were successful. We managed to, we fixed the logistics issue, we fixed the warehousing issue, we got the ERP implemented, we got the printing started in China. So it was through the pain and then the success of those projects that a real sort of team of leaders was formed from that. So I'm a big believer in working in a project style, because I do think it leads to very strong bonds of teamwork if the project is managed properly, and you're always going to get some conflict because people have different opinions about what needs to happen. But at the same time, the fact that people are working, like not in adverse conditions, but in conditions where they're under a lot more stress than they would normally be, tends to bring people together, and you know that they're going through a shared experience that eventually leads to a really positive outcome. And I think that actually then helps build really close team networks.
So how do you go about leading people who are older than you in Japan? Because like you say, a lot of the Kitihara team were probably much older. They're in your direct report line. They have to report to this young guy now.
Yeah.
How did you go about, I mean, you've got a couple of ways you can go there. You can be the sort of servant leader type, or you can just pull rank, or, you know, through force of will. I mean, there's a number of alternatives.
Yeah.
Which one did you choose?
Well, first of all, I don't have that problem anymore. So having aged a bit, but I tended to take a more consensus-based approach. Happy to listen to the opinions of the older managers, but also very clear about what we needed to do to get the business back on track. So, you know,
$6 million is a big hole.
Yeah, it is. It was a big hole, and you know, and there were multiple problems in this business. I've just touched on some of them, but it was about setting some very clear objectives for what we wanted to do as a company, where we needed to be, talking to the management team about how we get there, obviously putting forward my ideas about what needed to be done, listening to their concerns about that, and then trying to find a consensus where each of us managed to find some common ground. So, for example, I was insistent that we, you know, do go through the warehousing project, the ERP system, the outsourcing to China. How we did it though, that was more up to them. I had an idea of how I wanted it to be done, and rightly, you know, they would, you know, often point out, well, you know, there's this issue. So listening actually was key in making sure that those projects were successful in the end.
And it's a time of great change, of course, and so you're also bringing younger people up into the line of management. How did you go about getting innovation from the team? Because you've now got a combined force from 40 people to 300 something people, you know, and you've got a broader range of products that you can connect with different clients and cross-sell and upsell, well, a whole range of issues there that like, on the positive side, right? So what did you find worked well to get people to come up with ideas and solutions, and also got these projects to implement as well, which again, they probably hadn't had to do before, so there's got to be a fair bit of creativity going on to make those things work.
Yeah. It's an interesting point, because the publishing industry in general is relatively, you know, it's quite traditional. And there's an acknowledgement that things needed to change, but nobody was quite sure how to make that happen. So the industry around the world, Pearson in particular at that time, was very focused on a move towards digital content. But Japanese schools are not ready, or weren't ready for that type of transformation. So we had to try and find ways to gradually move and then implement products that could present opportunities for schools to use content digitally, but still have the basic textbooks there. So we were the first company, I think the first Pearson company anywhere, to have a Nintendo TOEIC test game came out, and it was really about sitting down with the publishers within the company, the actual people who were doing the publishing, and saying, well, this is what we need to happen. This is what's happening at the moment. I'm not a publisher. How do we close that gap? And really putting the onus on them to come up with the ideas. And when they didn't really move far enough, then that would be challenged. It's like, well, that's not exactly what we're looking for. It's really not going to make that much of a difference in the market here. I think gradually the publishing team and the editorial team really started to enjoy that process of everyone had a lot of ideas, and it's great when you sit down to dinner with people and they say, well, we should do this and we should do that. But within the company, often their managers are blocking them, or there's something that makes them afraid to say what they want to say. And by having these open conversations and just generally getting ideas onto the table that could then be discussed without any sort of concern about where it came from, I think it just made everybody more open to trying new things. And then, as I said before, with those projects as well, the idea is just to set the target for what was needed, but not necessarily to set the direction and leave it up to the team to make that choice about how to get there. So this is the budget, this is the end date, this is what we're expecting from it. How do we get there? And then, you know, I know those guys spent a lot of time and a lot of hard work going through every single possible problem that could have eventuated. Particularly, I remember the ERP system. There were some very big concerns at the very last minute, and we had to say, well, you know, what are the risks? Let's go for it. I think they're acceptable risks, and I'll take the blame if something goes wrong. And we launched it, and you know, as with all ERP systems, there was some hiccups at the beginning, but nothing really that stopped the business from operating.
I think in Japan often if you ask for ideas, it's hard to get one idea. But if you come up with an idea and you ask for what's wrong with the idea, tons of things come up straight away. So the glass is always half empty for a lot of people look at problems. So in terms of trying to build trust inside the team, make it one company as well, what did you find worked well to build the trust internally? And also the trust in you as well as a leader.
Yeah, I think in that particular instance with Pearson and you know, STH is a completely different beast because of
we'll talk about that in a minute as well.
To build trust there, I think the most important thing is first of all to listen, and then second to acknowledge that sometimes your own ideas are not always the right ones, and if you take on board some of the ideas that people have and some of the feedback that they have about things that you're trying to do, then they're more willing to accept some of the stuff that you're trying to do as well. So there's a give and take there, and I think it's probably one of the most important things. That it's time consuming to spend dinners, meetings, etc. Biting your tongue, not listening, not talking, and just listening to people, and then trying to find a way to take those ideas that have come out and the feedback that's come out and marry it with the objectives that you're trying to set for the business.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. That's a very complex thing for a lot of people because they feel I'm the boss, therefore I have to know stuff, and to admit that I don't know, am I diluting my presidential power here? Am I going to have a problem of people are not going to follow me? I mean, a lot of this stuff goes through people's minds when they're trying to calculate how they position themselves in the company. And again, you've got, you said, older people, more experienced people. So how did you, and we talked about, you know, that sort of, the sort of syndrome before about not imposter syndrome, not believing you're actually the full 100% yet. So how did you bridge that to be able to keep your authority, keep your position, power, but at the same time have flexibility to accept that, well, maybe I don't have all the ideas or the best ideas, and be open to other people's ideas without actually feeling that your position, your authority was tarnished?
I think the most important thing is that you have to take responsibility for the decisions that you make. And that was one of the key things within the Pearson Kirihara business. Everyone had ideas and they wanted to try things, but nobody wanted to be responsible if it went wrong. And that was the role that I had. It was listening to people, making a decision, and then saying, well, this is what we'll do, and I acknowledge that there are concerns about this particular choice, but if something goes wrong, then I'm the one who will take responsibility for that.
And in that sense too, you've got the head office sitting in the UK. You're over here innovating, changing, upgrading, spending dough to fix things, you know, to ultimately save dough.
Yeah.
Their support for what you're doing is critical. So how did you go about making sure that is sort of what was behind you was still there protecting you? Because you can appreciate sometimes we get out ahead of the head office, and next thing, chop, off comes your head, you know. So it's a bit of a tricky balance between head office pressures, communication with them, local pressures, communication with them, to juggle those two.
Yeah, I was relatively lucky. So the Japan office reported to our Hong Kong head office, and the guy who ran that actually hired me into Pearson however many years it was before. In my time in the UK, I'd actually spent working with the gentleman who eventually came on to be the CEO of Pearson as well. So I had a direct relationship both with the head of APAC and with the CEO of Pearson. So for me to communicate with them was, I guess, probably much easier because that relationship had formed previously, and it wasn't me coming into the business, running it, and then having to try and build a relationship with them. So I could pick up the phone or have a conversation with them about some of the issues, and feel and particularly Doogie, who worked in APAC, he had worked in Japan for quite a while, so he understood a lot of the issues. He was good friends with John, so between the two of us, we were able to outline, what the key issues were and how we needed to overcome them, and get the support both of the UK office and also of the APAC head office to sort of drive those changes.
So what did you do around culture? Because you've got an opportunity here. You don't really want to have a Kirihara culture anymore. Yes, it's going to be a Pearson culture, but very few people know what that means. 40 people out of 300. What does that mean? So how did you build up a Japan operation culture that everyone could identify with, but still feel part of the broader Pearson culture?
Yeah. Again, going back to 2011, one of the things that came out of that was the building that Kirihara had always been housed in, out in, where was it? Near out in Nakanoku. It was kind of old, and they'd been there for such a long time, and there was so much stuff in there. It just felt like a proper old Japanese office. And we used the situation with the earthquake to apply to head office for funding to get a new office, which we changed completely, because the old Kirihara building was across 6 floors, 6 or 7 floors, so it's very difficult to mingle and interact with people. We took an office over in Shinjuku, in the Sumitomo building there, where we had every single person on a floor, much more of an open plan identity. It's completely branded with Pearson values. So the situation that they were working in suddenly changed from being a very dingy,
Musty,
nasty type of office.
Cobwebs.
Yes, where no money was ever spent on improvements. The
Carpet from
bathrooms-
1970,
Exactly.
still there.
The bathroom smelled terrible, the whole lot. All of a sudden, we're in a fantastic new office, views of Fuji, 30 stories up in Shinjuku. New office equipment, the whole works. And I think the idea was, well, we're still publishing for Japan, but no matter where people looked, they could see these Pearson values of being brave, decent, and imaginative right around the office, right around the wall. There was just a feeling that we were in a proper Pearson office now in Japan. But the work that we were doing was still in Japanese, so we were producing textbooks for English kids at high school to learn grammar, etc. So I think that office move was significant. And the same thing happened in Pearson Korea, because I ran that office for a year or so as well, because the president and the finance director were fired for, let's say, financial irregularities. And the same situation there was that the office was old and had never really been
No love and care being devoted to anybody.
I remember thinking one day I walked into that office and I said good morning, and people were popping up like meerkats from behind stacks and stacks of books. And luckily that happened. The office move in Korea was similar to the one in Japan. It was a smaller team, but we took everyone out and put them into a nice new environment. And I think that's really, really important. So people want to come and work in a place that's comfortable for them to be in. Little things like free coffee can make a big difference to people's general feeling of well-being in the office and being looked after. So we went from being completely stingy about those types of things under the old president in Korea to, well, let's set this up and let's set ourselves up as we want to be seen to our customers, rather than just being a company sitting in an old office block.
So let's bring it forward to you've spent your time with Pearson, then you decide you want to get into sports and you find STH. So you came in as president, that was the role, you were brought in as president, you had an existing team here. So give us a background on how that, or you set it up from zero, or
yes.
how did that work?
Yeah, so what happened was that when STH UK won the rights to the hospitality program, the 2015 Rugby World Cup, they also had to bid for the 2019 rights. So it was a double whammy. Now, STH didn't have any idea of how to do business in Japan, but they really wanted the UK rights. So the rights for the England tournament. So they made a bid for both. And then we're thinking about a partner in Japan to work with, and they through the travel programs that they ran, they came across JTB, thought of them as being a good partner. The ex-CEO of JTB was at that game between South Africa and Japan in Brighton, in the hospitality areas. So he was quite keen, I think, after that game to sort of drive sports hospitality as a new business opportunity in Japan. So he wanted to invest in STH, but I think the guys were having a lot of trouble trying to get the final agreement over the line. So negotiations in Japan can sometimes take a long time. There's a lot of back and forth. So I was originally brought in to help advise the CEO of STH about how to finalise the agreement with JTB. So what I suggested was just set the company up with STH as a standalone shareholder, and that should then drive things to happen much more quickly because they could see
As an entity.
Yes. So there was an entity there, and within a month, the whole agreement had been finalised, money had been put into the
big bonus for Brendan for that one.
Into the joint venture.
Yeah.
So because of that time that I'd spent working with the STH UK CEO, he then offered me the role to run the business here. So at that time we didn't have an office. There was nothing at all here in Japan. So we had to first of all set up in a temporary office down in Akasaka Mitsuge, and then gradually as the company grew, we found our office down near now the current Olympic Stadium. So where the Rugby World Cup organising committee was based, we sat opposite. We sat above them, opposite the World Rugby team. So we worked very closely with the organising committee. So we went from literally no one being here at all in January 2017. A year later we had about 20 people, and the following year we had 40 people here. And gradually, as we went into the Olympics, we ended up getting up to about 100 people or so on that project. So very quickly grew that business.
So that's a big drive in people. So there's a couple of things here. How did you go about hiring people? Unknown company. Everyone's heard of rugby. Everyone's heard of the Olympics, but no one's heard of STH.
Yeah.
So how do you get them to come and join you? And then what happens after the Olympics? Because that didn't pan out as we would hope in terms of the hospitality part. Are we suddenly losing a lot of people, and there's a turmoil around who's staying, who's going? I mean, it sounds like there's some highlights and some challenges in there.
Yeah.
So how did that play out?
Well, if I take that second question first, essentially the majority of people who work in our business sort of work on a global circuit. So they will come in on a contract until a project is finished and then move on to the next one. So a lot of the people that were working on the Olympics for us then moved on to the FIFA World Cup, or the Commonwealth Games that have just been held in the UK,
Birmingham,
or they've moved on to the next Rugby World Cup or the next Olympics in Paris. So it's really about trying to manage a very small core team here, and then very quickly building up a larger project team to deliver the project. What we did is we brought people from the UK who had experience in running these projects. So we had our sales director and our operations director come out, and it was their job to pull teams together locally. And I know they struggled, particularly in operations, because there's no culture of sports hospitality in Japan.
No.
So he eventually ended up with a mixed team where he brought people in from overseas to work, and then had some local Japanese people who he was training up at the same time, trying to navigate the complexities of building large temporary structures.
Those guys must have been. They don't know Japan. I mean, you might have done this anywhere else in the world, I'll bet. As you get here, it's like suddenly, well, what? You mean I can't do that? That must have been hard.
I'll say there was some frustration.
But
it's a credit to the team, because eventually we delivered what was the most successful hospitality program the Rugby World Cup's ever had. In a country where there is no culture of hospitality and no real history of sports hospitality. So I think what we demonstrated was there is a market here for sports hospitality, but no one's really tried to build it before. But if you do build it, then people will come along. And for those guys, they really grew into their jobs. Martin, who was our operations director, first of all for the Rugby World Cup and then for the Olympics, there was a very robust personality, very blunt. He struggled, I think, with the idea of sitting down and discussing things endlessly.
Can't understand why that would be a problem.
No, and his Japanese never improved at all. But by far one of the best managers I've ever seen with his teams, and constantly getting setback after setback in Japan, because his expectations were similar to where he'd worked in the past. In the UK, he'd worked in Baku, I think on these Olympic Games before he came before he came to Japan. And even then he wasn't quite prepared for what he found here. But in terms of a personality that would get back up after every single knockback, it was just incredible. And I was extremely lucky because the guys who we hired for the Rugby World Cup, they all had a lot of experience, but it was through the problems of the Olympics where we actually had to operate as a real team without any outside help in terms of renegotiating our contract in Tokyo 2020 and just dealing with all the issues that kept coming up. I think really built that team into something special. So most of those people now have gone off and sit in our global executive management team, based purely, I think, on the experience that they got working as a really tight unit here in Japan.
And again, you know, you've come from a background in publishing, and you're now running the operation in Japan, starting from scratch, hiring people. But as you say, you've got this sort of army of contractors who are roaming the world, doing these sorts of events, these projects. But you're not an expert in that project management necessarily in hospitality and sports either. So how was that for you as the leader to have your ability to lead, given you've got people who have probably done X number of major sporting events, you know, globally, and you haven't done any. So how did you balance that out?
I honestly think it's about keeping your ego in check. So first of all, you've got to acknowledge that you don't have that experience, and you know, I think everyone knows that the best way to get the most out of a team is to hire people who are better at you at certain aspects. So we had a great sales director, we had a great operations director, a great finance director. None of them had experience working in Japan before, so that was my area of expertise. And my job, I guess, was to keep over the top of it when problems came up that they couldn't solve, to then figure out ways of doing that within a Japanese environment. And you know, I'm quite happy to admit, you know, I'm not the best at many things in this business, but the role that I have is to help sort of corral and manage those guys as they go through their issues, and they have their problems, and work with them to try and find a solution. Sometimes we find it internally, sometimes we find it externally, sometimes it's about using my network in Japan to find the best solutions. Sometimes it's about working with the shareholders to make that happen. So I don't think of myself as someone who leads a team by saying this is the way that it has to be done. It's always much more consensual. There's a lot of discussion about the best way forward, and it would not be right, I think, for me to take that approach of saying this is the way things have to be done, without having that background that other people have. And to be honest, I don't think people like it very much. People want autonomy, and they appreciate being able to make their own decisions about things, and then but also having the ability to talk to me when there's an issue and trying to find a solution together around that.
And how about for the sort of permanent team per se? Because you've got the sort of global, you know, hospitality, sporting event nomads who travel the world, which seems like an amazing sort of job to me. But anyway, that's a different podcast. But what about the Japanese team or the local team here? So you went from sort of nothing to a very large number to how many people is it at now?
We've got 15 at the moment.
15, right? Yeah. So you've really gone up and you've come right back down again. So how about for the permanent team, how are they sort of dealing with all this? Because I've got all these very robust, you know, opinionated foreigners who've done this many, many times, everywhere else but here, coming in and wanting to do a bunch of stuff, and it must have been driving everyone crazy, including yourself, trying to explain, well, yeah, but that's not how it works here, you know, but that's not how it works here. And for them too, because they're on the receiving end of, well, we've got to do this, well, actually, no, that's not going to work. So how did that work, keeping them from not quitting and saying it's too hard, I'm going to find an easier job?
Well, to be honest, when the company was first set up, it was designed specifically to only run the Rugby World Cup hospitality, because that was the only contract that we had.
Right.
While we were here working on that, we then worked with the organising committee of Tokyo 2020 and then won that contract as well. And then gradually, the evolution of the company sort of came about because we kept getting more business. So with Rugby World Cup in France, while we could run the hospitality there, seeing the success of what had happened in 2019, we realised there was a market here for people who wanted to go to the Rugby World Cup. So we've become licensed as a Class 1 travel company now as well, so that we've changed the business slightly. So in addition to sports hospitality, we now take people on sports experiences to international events, and so that's a travel program. So essentially, if we're working with events overseas, they're travel programs, but we try and keep them at a very high end, towards the higher end. So for example, at Rugby World Cup, one of our packages involves a stay in a castle and then going to see a match, or the types of experiences that we're offering are different to what the Japanese companies are doing.
Almost like a very high level concierge type of luxury experience.
Yes. Yeah. And then locally, we try and focus on the local events, because the travel companies here, such as JTB and HIS and Tobadop Tours and all the rest of it, have got such a large, or such a tight grip on the market. We can't compete with that, but nobody else can do hospitality like we can. So once the team finished after the Olympics, it's actually quite a sad moment, because going back to that period when I talked about Kirihara and doing a project together and having that success in the end, particularly after Rugby World Cup, so successful. Normally that team would disperse, but they carried on into Tokyo 2020 because we needed those people and we needed a lot more to make that project happen. So once Tokyo 2020 was over, all those people on contracts left. All the people who'd been brought in from the UK and other countries from within STH went back to those countries. So we were left with a team here where we had to kind of reset and put some new objectives in place for this business here about how we're going to continue to grow and develop locally.
So basically, the future for this company, as I understand what you're saying, is you're going to establish the hospitality business for sports in Japan, which has not existed until now.
Yeah.
Which is probably common everywhere else in the sporting world.
Yes.
So you're pathfinders and pioneers in that sense to create that.
Yeah.
So that must be a good, motivating aspiration for people to think, okay, we're doing something brand new in this country at a very high level.
Yeah, I think it is. It's exciting when you're trying something different in a new market, and the team here has got the confidence of having delivered the hospitality program at Rugby World Cup. The hospitality program at the Olympics, even though it didn't go ahead, was literally 2 weeks before we got the word that it couldn't go ahead because of the spectators. So it was ready to be delivered. We'd made all the sales. We knew that we could do it because of what had happened at the Rugby World Cup. So there's a lot of confidence now in the team about our ability to do these things. We've got a challenge on the travel side because we haven't done travel programs before, but we're working very closely with JTB to make sure that the types of problems that they know we would encounter are sort of highlighted and dealt with as early as possible. So it's an exciting business, and the team like working with sports, as most people do. To be involved in an operation like Rugby World Cup or Tokyo 2020 or the World Cup in France, where they've got to go off and do some travelling and check out the hotels and all the rest of it. But the perks of the job are actually quite nice.
Not bad.
Yeah. So.
And I guess too, in a culture which really Japan is very excellent and operating at a very high level in certain sports, and these tend to be the sports where hospitality fits in. So for the ordinary person to get to spend time with an elite person, a very famous Japanese athlete, for example, even foreign athletes, so for that matter as well, I guess, that's not the ordinary everyday thing you can do. It's like, that's a bit special, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So Yeah, there've been some great moments with sports stars, you know, and interacting with the team and being out on the town and drinking and all the rest of it, and you know, having a proper relationship with some of these people who you would normally only get to see
on TV. Yeah, I guess, you know, in terms of, you've said that, you know, the company had a very short life expectancy. 2019 Rugby World Cup, company's going to close. Yeah. But yet here you are, we're 2022 going to 2023, and you're forging a brand new business in Japan, which is also, I guess, must be a good motivational aspect of that too.
Yeah, and you know, the more contracts that we sign, the more confidence there is in the team about the future of the business as well. So,
and do the people who join, you know, from the start, do they realise that, well, this company will end post Rugby World Cup? Do they have that understanding this is a short-term contract, right? So they didn't have expectations of lifetime employment. No. I'm not going to be here till I retire. I'm going to do this job and then I'm going to do something else. So for those who wanted to stay on, this is all cream, isn't it?
Yes.
Including probably the president.
Yeah, exactly. He's enjoying it the most.
Yeah, exactly. So if we're going to give some advice to someone who's going to be sent to Japan, and they're going to be running an operation here, you've done a startup with this one, and you've done a sort of rescue with the previous one with Pearson. What would be some advice you'd give people who don't speak Japanese, don't know the culture, they're going to come to this country and run an operation in Japan?
I think the first thing is, and it's very hard to do, but the first thing is to try and come with no expectations. Because if
won't the headquarters have expectations for them?
Yes, but how can I put it? No expectations on how they're going to implement the objectives that they've been set. Because if they come into the country thinking that things have to be done a certain way, it may succeed, but more often than not, it won't. So I think there has to be the idea that you've got to be open when you come here about how you approach the job, because you know the ways of working here, the meetings that you do, and the sorts of things that go on in meetings, for example, the relationships that you have, they're all very different to working in Western cultures, and it does take a little bit of time to adjust. And you know, I think the perfect example is the silence that you can sometimes get in a meeting here. You know, you can be talking to Japanese colleagues, throw out a question or make a comment, and there'll be a long silence, and it can get very uncomfortable. And the idea is that, well, I've got to jump in and say something else, and you just kind of keep talking. Getting comfortable with silence, I think, is really important here. So let people have time to think, understanding that they're often thinking in a second language, so they need time to formulate their thoughts a little bit. So that's probably the first thing. And then the second thing is, as I mentioned earlier, and you know, this is something that I like to do. It may not be to everyone's taste, but to spend quite a bit of time listening, canvassing opinions, making sure that what you're trying to do has got some degree of support, because what you can often find is that when you come in and tell people what you want them to do, you may not get any reaction, which causes you to think that everyone agrees with you, but in reality it could be that no one agrees with you, and you'll find that people just don't want to do what you've suggested. So there'll be go slows, there'll be all sorts of ways of making that not happen.
Yeah, I found that I don't understand actually means I don't want to do it in Japan. It's not, I understand perfectly, but I don't want to do it. So when I say that, I'll just say, I don't understand. So those code words got to be learned, haven't they?
I remember having a fairly tense meeting at Pearson early in my time, because we were trying to get quite a lot of projects being done. And I kept getting this constant reply of muri. Everything was muri, impossible to do muri. And
I can't even go down too well.
So I remember one day, you know, quite out of character for me, I lost my temper a bit. I slammed my hand on the table and said, I never want to hear the word muri in a meeting again. And you know, everyone was a bit shocked, and I knew a few years later that we were running into quite a difficult project when one of my managers, no one ever said Muri again.
Oh, really? That worked.
He said, Muri janai kedo. It's not impossible, but. And I realised then that, first of all, I had a massive impact with that comment that I'd made at that time. But secondly, on this particular project, that we were really on the edge of not succeeding. So it was kind of a wake up call for me to spend a bit of time focusing on that too. But you're right. The easiest thing here to do is to not change anything, and the hardest thing to do is try and implement change. I mean, change is hard anywhere, but here it takes extra effort because not only do you have to outline what the change is that you're trying to put in place, you've got to demonstrate that you've thought of every single problem that could happen because of that change, and then you've thought of every single solution to manage those problems as well. So it does take an awful lot of work in communicating.
Yeah, and it is a mindset thing too. I think we're coming from Australia, which is a bit of a can-do place, and the mentality is we'll find a way, we'll work it out, we'll make it happen.
Yeah.
So when you deal with Japanese team members and you put up an idea and all you get is this constant negativity, you know, this constant feedback on, oh, this is going to work, this is going to be a problem, this will be bad, blah, blah, blah. From a mindset point of view, it can be quite confronting, like, what's wrong with these people, you know?
Yes.
And so you're not understanding that their risk reduction culture, for them, the correct process is to work out all the trouble beforehand.
Yes.
Work out all the solutions of trouble before you do anything.
Yeah.
Whereas I think we probably tend to do it and we'll fix that up on the way through, you know.
Yeah.
There aren't a few problems, no problem, we'll work it out, you know.
Yeah.
So that, when you're coming from those two quite disparate starting points, and you don't know Japan, that I think can be quite a hard one to get your head around, unless you know,
Yes.
as you say, you adjust your expectations.
Yeah.
And people aren't necessarily giving you feedback because they're objecting. They're giving you feedback because they think that is their role.
Yes.
To give you early warning
Yeah.
on things that you may not have considered.
Yeah.
You know, if you change your mindset on it, then you're probably a bit more relaxed about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing that you need to do here is to have a lot of individual conversations because people in a meeting are not going to want to give an opinion, generally speaking. Some people will, but generally speaking, no. You almost need to spend a lot of time doing individual meetings beforehand to kind of understand the mindset to help prepare you for the larger meeting that you're going to do. So, you know, you can sit in a meeting and be overwhelmed by the silence that greets you sometimes if there's more than a few people in the room and you don't know them very well and they don't know you very well. So that idea of explaining your ideas individually, again, it takes a long time. But what I always find with the projects in Japan is that because people do think of all the problems and all the potential solutions, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, they tend to roll out relatively smoothly at the end, and there's not much that needs to be done after they've been delivered.
So it's sort of saying speed, just a different stages in terms of how you get there.
Yes.
What would be some other advice you give to someone who's new to Japan?
Oh, that's not enough.
Well, I'm just, if that's it, if that's what you're, that's fine. I'm just
I think
you're doing well here. I'm sure I'll just dig a bit more out of you. It'll be good.
Yeah, I don't know offhand.
Well, should they learn Japanese?
Yeah, well, that's what I was just about to say. So, at least a little bit of Japanese is always useful. Enough to be able to go out and have a few beers and have a small conversation. And I say this having studied Japanese quite hard at the beginning of my time here, and then let it slide for the last 10 or 15 years. And I just started Japanese lessons again yesterday, realizing that I need to follow my own advice. But it's so helpful having some Japanese. And I came here with absolutely none. Didn't have a single word. And was thrown into a homestay for the first week that I was here, which was great. But yeah, it's a really important part, I think, of living here. It just helps you so much in your day-to-day life.
So if we're going to define leadership, how would you define
I think of leadership as the person in the team who ultimately takes responsibility and makes decisions, but involves the whole team in the lead up to that final decision making process. As you've heard me say today, I like that idea of being able to listen to people and then, based on what I've heard, make a final decision. And that's partly because of the experiences that I've had here. So I've been in situations where I haven't worked in one industry for very long, and there are people that I've worked with that have much more experience than me. So I need to take that approach. It's not necessarily the same if you've been in a company for a long period of time and you know everything. Maybe that approach is not necessarily the right way. But for me, it's really about the accountability and letting the team know that if anything goes wrong, I'm the one who has to take the blame. And if things go right, then the team gets the credit for that. So trying to make the team feel comfortable with that approach, I think is the way that I would define leadership.
Good place to end to. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you very
great.
much.
Thanks.
So, join us again for the next episode of Japan's top business interviews.